Hi everyone, welcome back to Lulumath. This video is on consecutive integers and we're just going to define what they are and how to set up the let statements for consecutive integers. Make sure to watch the follow-up video on how to solve word problems with consecutive integers in them if you'd like some help on that. So the first thing we have to do is we have to define what an integer is. So the integers are just whole numbers and their opposites or their negatives. So an example of an integer would be like 5, but also -5 is an integer. We could have 2, but -2 is an integer. 0 is an integer because it's a whole number, and because it's neither positive nor negative, it doesn't have an opposite, so it's just 0. It doesn't have like a corresponding negative version of it. So essentially, for them to be whole numbers, we just can't have any parts. No extra fractions, no extra decimals. So a non-example would be 5.5 because there's an extra half, right? Or if we had -2.734. So they have to be whole numbers. Now, what are consecutive integers? They're integers that follow one another in order. And we're going to look at 3 different types of consecutive integers. We're going to look at just regular consecutive integers, consecutive even integers, and consecutive odd integers, okay? And an understanding of what these integers are will help us when we're setting up our let statements for any word problems with consecutive integers in them. So let's start by taking a look at just a set of consecutive integers. So I'm just going to randomly start with the integer 4. So the next integer in order that follows 4 would have to be 5. And the next one would have to be 6. And the next one after that would have to be 7. But here's the thing. If 4, we didn't know what it was, we would call it by a variable. So I'm going to call it A. So if I were to go from 4 to 5, the only way I can go from 4 to 5 is if I add 1. So that means that if my first integer is A, my next integer would be A plus 1. Well, to go from 5 to 6, I would have to add another 1. So if I take this A plus 1 and then add 1 to it, I would end up getting A plus 2. And then to get to the next one, I would have to add 1 again. From 6 to 7, I would add 1. So to get to the next one, I would take that A plus 2, and then I would add 1 to that, and then I would get 3. And I would just keep going, A plus 4, A plus 5, A plus 6, so on and so forth. And this makes sense, right? Because to go from 4 to 7, you would have to add 3. And it doesn't matter what my first number is that I start with. So I could start with, I don't know, I'm just going to randomly choose a number, 11. So to go from 11 to the next number, I would have to add 1, which is 12. To go to the next number, I would add 1 again, which would bring me to 13. And then add 1 again would bring me to 14. So it doesn't matter where you're starting. It's always A plus 1, A plus 2, A plus 3. Awesome. So now let's talk about what happens if we have consecutive even integers. So if my first integer was 4, let's just randomly start with 4 again. The next even integer after 4 would have to be 6. It can't be 5 because 5 is odd. And then the next one after 6 would have to be 8. And then the next one after 8 would have to be 10. So let's say my first integer was b. I'm going to use a different variable here so we can see this is kind of a different separate situation. So to go from 4 to 6, I would have to add 2. So I would have b plus 2. Same thing here. I would just add that same 2. Now, to go from 6 to 8, I would add another 2. So here I would take this b plus 2 and then I would add another 2 to that. Well, b plus 2 is b plus 4. Right? And then to go from 8 to 2, I would have to add 2 to that. So I would take this b plus 4 that we have here, and then I would add another 2 to that. So 4 plus 2 is 6. So this would be b plus 6. So it would start with b plus 2, b plus 4, b plus 6, b plus 8, so on and so forth, right? And it doesn't matter what number I start with. I could start with 28. The next one would be 30 because I would add 2 to that. The next one would be 32 because I would add 2 to that. And the beauty of consecutive integers is that their let statements are always going to be the same no matter what. You don't have to worry about deciding on how to write your let statements based on what the problem is saying. As soon as you see consecutive integers, you go straight to x plus 1, x plus 2. Where as soon as you see consecutive even integers, you go straight to x plus 2, x plus 4. Now let's talk about consecutive odd integers. So I will try the integer 5, for example. 5 is an odd integer. Well, the next odd integer after 5 is 7. The next one after that is 9. And the next one after that is 11. So now to go from 5 to 7, I would still have to add 2 because I have to skip over that 6. So to go from 5 to 7, I go past the 6 and then I go one step further. So that's a total of 2 steps. So here's where people get a little bit confused about this, because even though they see the word odd, it seems counterintuitive that we're adding 2 here and then we're adding 2 again and we add 2 again. But we have to do that in order to skip over the number in between. So adding 2 allows us to skip the number in between. So if our first number here, let's call it C, we would call this C plus 2, we would call this C plus 4, and we would call this C plus 6 because every time we add 2, it's an extra 2 here. Right? Exactly the same thing that happened with our even integers. Now, if you don't like this, if you're like, it's odd, I don't like that I'm adding 2 each time, then what you could do instead is just call this C plus 1, C plus 3, C plus 5, C plus 7. You're still technically adding 2 every time, but you have these odd numbers here. I personally don't prefer to do that because it's important for me to understand that if I have odd integers, then I would add 2 to skip that even number in between. Okay? Now, an important note is that everything that I'm going to highlight here, these are what we would use for our let statements. And as long as you understand why these are our let statements, they make consecutive integer problems a piece of cake, or at least somewhat easier. I just want to mention one more thing really quickly, and that is that our consecutive integers are allowed to be negative. The only thing that they're not allowed to be is not whole numbers, right? But we have to be careful about our negative consecutive integers because we have to think about the order that these numbers go in on the number line. So for example, if my first consecutive integer was -7, we don't want to say that the next one is -8 because it is one above the -7. So it would be -6, -5, -4, so on and so forth, right? If we had consecutive even integers, if our first one was -6, then our next one would be -4 and not -8, so on and so forth. And that's it for this video. This video will help us out when we get into word problems with consecutive integers. So if you would like to learn more about that, that video is available. If you have any questions, let us know in the comments below or at lulumath.com, where you can also find blank or completed notes for this video. If you found this video to be useful, please make sure to subscribe and please share with others. Thank you, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.